Okay, so with Unleashed we discussed the eras of Sonic as I see them, classic, adventure, and boost. But that's not the full story. We also have to take into consideration the actual timing of each release, the years they came out, because that can also tell you a lot about what the franchise was doing. So if we break time up into half decades, the latter half of the 2000s, from 2006 to 2010, that was a rough time for Sonic the Hedgehog. And during that span of 5 years, which began with Sonic saving a princess and ended with a kart racing spinoff, a big defining factor in this series was Mario envy. I brought it up in other reviews. The Sonic plotline in 06, the wall jump and non-linearity of Unleashed, the everything of Sonic 4. And when it was originally revealed, this game, Sonic Colors, people looked at this Wii game featuring a gaming mascot going into space and using various power-ups while switching between 2D and 3D level design, and they had some galactic flashbacks. Sonic Colors, originally released exclusively on the Nintendo Wii in November of 2010, and given an extra letter in the name in PAL territories. This is one of the more praised games in the series, at least for the 3D entries. The majority of critics gave it 80% or above, fans still seem to appreciate it to this day, and it basically defined the series' identity for the next few main entries. Like, this is the game that solidified the Boost era, even more so than Unleashed. Sonic Colors has left an impact on the series unlike any game since the 90s, and tons of people would say it stands the test of time given the remaster in 2021 was considered a big deal, if much buggier than the original. But outside of the quality control issues with the Ultimate ports, people love this game now, and people loved it back then. The Detroit Lions probably shouldn't book their Super Bowl flights, but hopefully you're convinced that Sonic Colors is worth your while. Man, you could say anything in a review back then. What were we talking about? Now, it's worth noting everything I've mentioned up to this point relates to the console version developed by Sonic Team. There was also a DS version made by Dimps, which was fairly different. That version is apparently more along the lines of a third Sonic Rush game, but without a playable Blaze and including the Wisps, including 2 exclusive colors to call its own. But just talking about the Wii version, yeah, there is still a great deal of affection for Sonic Colors. And the people who love it might not be happy with me by the end of this review. Development on Colors began after Unleashed was completed, and understandably kept most of the core gameplay elements from the Hedgehog style in that game. However, with the iffy response to the spin-off of the Black Knight and the general disdain for the Werehog gameplay in Unleashed, they decided to ditch some of the more gimmicky ideas and keep the gameplay focus on Sonic the Hedgehog. Now, as someone who honestly preferred the Tails and Knuckles levels in Adventure 1, I'm not convinced that Sonic's friends were actually the big problem with these games, but hey, that's what fans in the late 2000s wanted. However, the developers did still want to keep the gameplay interesting and not just have players doing the exact same thing for 40 levels straight. So instead they incorporated the idea of temporary power-ups in the form of the Wisps, which gave Sonic new abilities for a certain period of time. This may have also been added as part of the game's shift in audience. Producer Takashi Iizuka stated the goal for the game was to appeal to the new, younger fans of Sonic who had been introduced to the character through, say, Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, or Smash Bros. Brawl, or this newfangled thing called the Internet. Never heard of it. They went all out with Colors release, even delisting several Sonic games with low reviews in the lead-up to raise the brand's value. A decision which we've discussed before, and I feel the need to bring up again because wow, is that a shitty move for a game publisher. Yes, it's not exactly a practice Sega has dropped over the years. They delisted several classic Sonic games in the lead up to Origins, and by the time you're watching this, the original version of Sonic Generations won't be individually purchasable on Steam anymore. But there, at least, it was because they were releasing new versions for people to buy, so they weren't trying to erase them from history. With this, though, 06, Secret Rings, Black Knight Unleashed, and the second Writers game were pulled from store shelves and digital storefronts. Thankfully, some of these have since been relisted, and since all of them got physical releases, they weren't exactly lost media, but it's still an incredible dick move, just because you want to make people forget about the games not everyone loved. It's also a cocky move on top of that, given it could have backfired hard. Like, imagine if they went out of their way to pull the bad Sonic games off the store shelves and put up Sonic Colors instead, only for Sonic Colors to review even worse. Well, thankfully, that didn't happen, and the game did fairly well. Like I said, high review scores, plus it sold over 2 million copies in like 4 or 5 months. Everyone loves Sonic Colors, including 10-year-old me. But not including Sterling, she hated it a lot. Only fully negative critics review on Metacritic, not sure why. I mean, maybe she had a point, like I said, I'm not the biggest fan myself, but I wouldn't go as far as she did. Well, since the game doesn't think the plot is important enough to start with, let's get the writing out of the way now. Eggman's opened up an amusement park. What, again? Specifically, he's opened an amusement park in space, the Egg Planet Park. He claims it's completely innocent and motivated by a desire to its own, which I'm pretty sure was a gambit he tried to pull in Sonic X at one point, wasn't it? Well, either way, Tails and Sonic don't believe him, so they sneak their way in and discover Eggman's captured a species of alien known as Wisps, and is attempting to steal their Hyper-Gohan power to fuel a mind control device that could take over the whole world. Sonic's world specifically, because I guess now he's not from the same planet as Sonic. Wait, when did the post-Chronicles mandates go into effect? The plot and story for this game really aren't important, and you can tell because it doesn't even pretend to take itself seriously. The closest thing to a new friend we have is a wisp named Yacker. There's a running gag throughout the game of Tails' translator messing up the alien language to sound humorous. Oh, you can't see the air quotes in the voiceover. Humorous. There are a ton of immature jokes about Eggman being bald, passing gas, bad sushi. Almost every boss battle starts with Sonic trying to trash talk the bosses, except the bosses don't talk, and for 4 of them aren't seemingly even alive, they're just vessels. I won't lie, at first it was kind of charming, the very cartoony nature of it all, but by the second half, it was getting really old really fast. Even seemingly serious plot points get undercut by constant one-liners, lamp shading, and immaturity. It's kind of a logical extension of Unleashed's more cartoony moments, but it's turned up to 11 here, and I'm not gonna lie, it's really grating by game's end. There's a reason so many fans reacted to Frontier's more serious tone with a sigh of relief, even while others decried it as tonal dissonance. But we'll get to the Sonic games written by a good Sonic writer next month. We've got the games written by the Happy Tree Friends writers to get through. Yeah, I'm not a fan of the writing and colors. There are some lines I liked, but really I just don't think this style is my cup of tea. Admittedly, maybe it's just because I grew up with the Sonic series, and games like Adventure 2 and Shadow the Hedgehog, I'm more used to taking the Blue Hedgehog seriously. I know for a lot of people, this sort of light and jokey tone is much closer to what they would want and expect from this kind of world, and I won't argue with them. As for presentation, well, this is a downgrade. It's to be expected going from a game released on 360 and played on Series X to a game developed and played on the Wii, but man, are the graphics a lot worse looking here. It's not terrible, of course, this is still a very impressive game for the hardware, very on par with the best games for Wii. We even have an NVIDIA game engine providing the physics here, since I guess the Hedgehog engine would have been a little bit too much for the poor old Wii to handle. And there are some areas that look genuinely beautiful. Starlight Carnival with the neon lights around the Armada, Planet Wisp with the natural beauty mixed with harsh construction sites, and the outer space segments of Asteroid Coaster. This game does do a lot with the hardware it's on, but I still think other games look better, sorry. I feel like this game is just a little bit too dark a lot of times, and I'm not really sure why. Maybe it's an issue with my TV or my Wii, or maybe I'm just imagining things. Also, the pre-rendered cutscenes are incredibly sparse and a lot weaker looking than in Unleashed. Seriously, what happened there? Was Marza only brought on for the demo cutscene? Sound-wise, we have a new set of voice actors premiering here and in Free Riders. Mike Pollock stayed on as Eggman, but Sonic's VA changed once again to Roger Craig Smith, who puts in a fairly good performance. Tails, meanwhile, gets his, 50th voice actor. Now played by Kate Higgins, he sounds alright. He's kind of flat at times, I'm not super into every line delivery, but hey, Higgins stayed on until Lost World show, I'm sure she'll have time to improve. We also have new characters in the form of Orbot, based on Eggman's assistant from Unleashed, and Cubot, whose gimmick is that he keeps getting new accents. Orbot sounds fine, I prefer Cubot's New York accent to the others, and finally Smith also announces the Wisp powers when activated. Yeah, that definitely doesn't get annoying. Music is great, as usual. I like a lot of it, though it's not all completely memorable. It's strong, but they do a lot of the same constant beat, and it does get a bit grating over time. It doesn't help that the music gets kind of muted whenever you're boosting, which, happens a lot. Plus, a jingle plays pretty much anytime you're using a Wisp power, which can also get a bit annoying. And as for the vocal themes, I like Reach for the Stars, it's fun and energetic, and I like how it becomes something of a leitmotif across the game, but the over-auto-tuned vocals are a bit of a turnoff for me. The ending theme, Speak With Your Heart, is basically just more of the same, but a little bit worse and impressively forgettable. Yeah, not the most exciting OST in the series, but definitely a strong one. I like it. So, pretty solid 7 out of 10 for the presentation overall, 4 out of 10 for the writing. Now let's talk about the gameplay. This may take a while, so let's get into it. Well, we've got the Boost gameplay back for Unleashed, albeit with some major changes. For one thing, Boost is no longer filled by collecting rings, instead only being filled through the new white wisps. You can get them from the wisp capsules littered across the levels for a big fill, or by beating certain enemies which contain individual wisps. It's interesting, and I'm glad there's a new way to get a lot of boost energy at once, but there is something lost with the rings no longer adding to the boost. I mean, combined with once again losing all rings in a single hit, and the only real reason to collect multiple rings is to bump up your ranking at the end of each level. You might think, oh, but what about getting extra lives for 100 rings? That's useful still, right? And yeah, it would be. Except that's been removed. The only way to get extra lives now is to find them in the levels, getting an A or S rank in a level, or finding them in the letters and numbers of the results screen, because yes, gameplay. And the rankings felt all over the place in my experience, though my gaming skills are already pretty hard to determine. Like, I got multiple S ranks and multiple D ranks, and I could not work out what the determining factor was in each case. It doesn't help that dying sends you back to either a checkpoint or the start of the level, but with the timer still wherever it was when you died. Even in levels without a single checkpoint, die right near the end and you go right back to the beginning of the level with all that time still on the clock. And trust me, I will get into the moments of unfair difficulty. Additionally, the quick step and drift have been modified to only be available during specific sections. For the drift, I actually kind of prefer it, even if it means you can't boost in those sections because the drift button is shared with the boost button. For the quick step, look, I understand why they did this. This is a game that offers a sideways remote as a controller, and that controller has 6 buttons, 1 D-pad, and motion controls. You can't put quick step on the shoulder buttons if the player might not even have shoulder buttons on their controller. But oh lord, does it make the controls in the boost sections feel incomplete. You can't change your horizontal position while running most of the time without straight up turning, and this game has a lot less turning than in Unleashed. It leaves the gameplay feeling clunkier than it did before, which is unfortunate, but maybe not surprising. I will say though, I do kind of prefer the trick jump system here compared to Unleash. Instead of having to hit QuickTime events in a specific order, you hit the jump button with specific timing to jump farther and get more points. It's a small thing, but it does genuinely feel better than the constant QTE spamming Unleash did. There really aren't any QTEs in Colors outside of just hitting the jump button at the right time, usually to do a homing attack. Though now, if you press the jump button twice without a homing target nearby, you do a double jump instead of a jump dash, which I mean, okay. It does work, it can spice up the platforming, I'm not complaining, it's just an odd difference compared to most entries. But of course, the big addition to the gameplay in Colors is the color powers, courtesy of the newly introduced Wisps. Outside of the white Wisps, which give you boost, we have 7 colors of Wisp, each giving you a different ability, triggered by either shaking your Wiimote or hitting the R button on the classic controller. Or Xeon GameCube controller. Wait, how many games did I play on this controller? So, to summarize, Cyan turns you into a laser that can go into certain lightning rods, bounces between diamond obstacles, and rebounds off of walls. Cool looking but largely situational. Yellow lets you drill through soft ground and water, going in all directions until you emerge or run out of fuel. One of the more useful ones and probably the most fun to control. Orange turns you into a rocket and shoots you up into the air pretty quickly, but since you can't directly control it after launching, the most interesting things are before activation and while skydiving afterwards. Odd how it's built, but it can be okay. Blue turns you into a box that slams down, breaks certain blocks, and switches some blue blocks and blue rings and vice versa. So situational, it can't even be activated in some areas, and leaving the right area will automatically turn it off. Green lets you hover through the air slowly, going up as you hold the button, and gives the only light speed dash equivalent in the game because, okay, one of the better Wisps to use, but maybe just a bit slow as standard. Pink turns you spiky and lets you roll along walls in the ceiling, while also ignoring spikes and automatically hurting enemies you come into contact with. Very useful and cool, maybe the best Wisp in the game overall. And finally, purple turns you into a giant head that eats everything, gets bigger and slower as it destroys more and more. A very interesting mechanic, but being introduced near the very end of the game, it doesn't really get used to its full potential. And that's every Wisp in the Wii version of Colors. How'd I do time-wise? The Wisps definitely add a new dimension to gameplay, especially yellow, green, and pink. Admittedly, some of them can feel really gimmicky, honestly more so than the Werehog did, but as far as gimmicks go, I think these really do spice things up well. I can see why they appeared in the next 3 3D games in the series, even if it does make the ending where Tails regrets that the Wisps have to leave incredibly ironic. So yeah, overall, the core gameplay, I like it. It isn't perfect, but I think it works well for what they were going for in this game. So how is the level design around that gameplay? Oh, not very good, thanks for asking. Okay, the level design isn't awful most of the time. We have collectibles in the form of red rings, which actually unlock something. We have enemies put in smart places. We have boosting sections, rail grinding sections, platforming sections, enemy sections. There are all the ingredients here for great level design, but, well, let's start with the act and zone issue. Sonic Colors has 7 main areas to play levels in, which each have 6 acts to complete. Now, this isn't like in Unleashed, where each hub has a couple required missions and then a set of optional bonus acts. All 6 acts in each zone have to be completed, in order, to unlock the boss of that zone. The maps may make you think otherwise, since they branch out and have dead ends, and, are world maps, but don't let that fool you. This is a linear set of levels that all have to be beat in order to complete the area. So if you don't like the theming of one of the worlds, too bad, so sad, you're stuck with it for 6 acts. But don't worry, because some of those acts are going to be pathetically short. Yeah, that's another thing that makes all the acts being required feel wrong. Some of these clearly did not have the same level of effort put into them. We have tons of short mini-levels, usually using level geometry from one of the other acts, which either have you only doing a single thing the whole act, or easily finished within a minute. The entire second half of the first world are short 2D-only sequences, which feel like they were supposed to be bonus challenges for bumping up collectible count. So much of it feels like it was supposed to be completely optional bonus stuff, so they didn't put as much effort into it, but then it got made a part of the critical path for reasons. The actually optional levels are in Game Land with the Sonic Simulator, which is also the game's excuse for multiplayer content. It's basically a selection of 2D levels you can play through either alone or with a friend, as either Sonic robots or a me. You unlock more levels by collecting red rings, and if you get all 180 red rings and complete all 21 levels, you can play as Super Sonic in just about any level, which is cool. I mean, I didn't unlock it, but I'm glad it's an option in a 3D Sonic for once. As for the areas themselves, Tropical Resort is a fairly standard tutorial level introducing most of the new mechanics and controls, and the hotel and space theme works alright, but the level design really doesn't leave an impression. Sweet Mountain is even more interesting thematically, and it's a lot more substantial and lengthier, but the level design is still pretty uninteresting, with the sections where you try to avoid missiles being the only standout. Starlight Carnival is one of the coolest looking zones, racing between the full armada with neon lights and a mysterious road under your feet, but it's also the least engaging in terms of platforming and substance. Planet Wisp is very beautiful, yes, and I appreciate the pink wisp getting a chance to show off. Hell, it gives a few wisps a chance to shine, but overall the actual level design doesn't leave a huge impression on me. Aquarium Park reveals that Sonic has learned how to jump infinitely in water, and honestly, having that form of pseudo-swimming combined with water running in the drill wisp might make it one of the best water levels in the series. Asteroid Coaster is thematically amazing, a lot more memorable in its level design, and at times brutally difficult without feeling like complete bullshit, so I'd say it's maybe the best zone in the game. And finally, Terminal Velocity. The first act is bullshit, especially during the big chaser section with the Motobugs. The final boss is fun and thematically appropriate, and then the final act is basically a blink and you'll miss it moment. God, I miss Sonic 2's zones. Overall, I really don't hate all these levels, but if I had an issue with Unleashed's levels being forgettable, this game only doubled down on that. There are a few cool set pieces, and the Wisps do spice up certain levels, but overall, the whole experience kinda just washed over me. This was one of the shorter games to play through too. It only took me a little over 7 hours to get from the jump in Act 1 to the end credits, and those hours felt fine. I don't hate this game, it is pretty solidly built, and I do appreciate how it kept me invested in the series as a kid, but overall it's just not as incredible as everyone used to treat it. I honestly think it was a little bit overhyped. But hey, it was still a good game, and combined with the high points of Unleashed, I think this was a good trajectory for the series. Definitely worth a look if you haven't played it before. And that was Sonic Colors. I didn't hate it,